In her forced wedding, she ran away, crying, and ended up getting into a millionaire's car without knowing it. Subscribe for more romantic stories like the video and tell me where you're watching from. The rain fell like a curtain of tears over the small chapel of Saint-Étienne in Provence, as if the sky itself mourned what was about to happen inside. Emily Carter stood before the ornate mirror in the bride's chamber, her reflection a stranger, dressed in ivory silk and lace that felt more like a burial shroud than a wedding gown. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the veil for the 100th time, not out of nervousness, but from the weight of the choice that wasn't hers to make. Through the wooden door, she could hear the murmur of guests, the clinking of champagne glasses, the cheerful laughter of people celebrating a union that felt like a prison sentence. "You look beautiful, darling." Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts like a knife wrapped in velvet. Margaret Carter entered the room, her expression a practiced mask of maternal pride that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Richard is waiting. Don't keep him any longer." Richard Pemberton. The name alone made Emily's stomach clench. He was her father's business associate, 20 years her senior, with cold eyes and a smile that never touched his soul. For months, her parents had orchestrated this arrangement with the precision of a military campaign, painting it as a merger of families, a strategic alliance that would save Carter imports from bankruptcy. "I need a moment alone, Mother," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the classical music drifting from the chapel. Margaret's lips thinned. "Emily, we've discussed this. Your father and I have sacrificed everything for this family. Richard is a good man with connections throughout France. This marriage will secure our future." "What about my future?" The words escaped before Emily could stop them, sharp and desperate. Her mother's face hardened. "Your future is this family's future. Now, compose yourself. I'll tell your father you're ready." She swept out of the room, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken threats. Emily stared at her reflection once more. At 26, she had allowed herself to become a pawn in someone else's game. She had spent her life being the dutiful daughter, the perfect student, the obedient child who never questioned, never rebelled. Her degree in literature sat unused while she managed her father's administrative tasks. Her dreams of teaching, of writing, of traveling beyond the confines of their small world in Provence had been quietly suffocated beneath layers of obligation and guilt. But as she looked at herself in that wedding dress, something inside her finally cracked. Through the window, she saw Richard standing near the chapel entrance, checking his watch with the impatience of a man who viewed this ceremony as another business transaction. He had never asked about her dreams, her fears, her desires. He had never looked at her with warmth or genuine affection. To him, she was an acquisition, nothing more. The music changed. The wedding march began to play. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Her father would be at the door any second now, ready to walk her down the aisle toward a life that would slowly suffocate every part of who she truly was. She couldn't do it. The realization struck her with the force of lightning. She couldn't walk down that aisle. She couldn't say vows she didn't mean to a man she didn't love. She couldn't sacrifice her entire existence for her parents' financial security. Without thinking, without planning, Emily grabbed the skirts of her wedding gown and ran to the side door of the chapel. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She pushed through the door that led to the garden, her heels sinking into the wet grass as rain immediately soaked through her veil. Behind her, she heard her father's voice calling her name, confusion morphing into anger. She heard her mother's gasp, Richard's sharp curse, the collective murmur of shocked guests realizing the bride was fleeing. Emily ran. She ran through the manicured gardens of the chapel, her dress catching on rose bushes and hedges. She ran through the narrow cobblestone streets of the village, her veil trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender that had become a banner of rebellion. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain, her carefully applied makeup running in dark rivers down her cheeks. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't go back. The street began to slope downward, and her heel caught on a loose stone. Emily stumbled, crying out as she fell forward, her hands scraping against the wet cobblestones. Her dress was ruined, her veil torn, her hair falling in tangled wet strands around her face. She sat there in the rain, sobbing, her entire body shaking with the magnitude of what she had just done. She had destroyed everything. Her parents would never forgive her. Their business would fail. Richard would be humiliated. The entire village would talk about her shame for years to come. But even through the panic and fear, she felt something else, a tiny spark of freedom. The sound of a car approaching made her look up. Through the curtain of rain, she saw headlights cutting through the grey afternoon. A sleek black Mercedes came to a smooth stop beside her, and the passenger window rolled down. "Are you hurt?" a male voice asked, deep and concerned, speaking in flawless French with a slight English accent. Emily couldn't see the driver clearly through her tears and the rain. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. I need to leave. Please. I need to get away from here." There was a moment of hesitation, then the sound of the car door opening. A figure emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, holding an umbrella. He approached her, and she saw polished shoes, expensive trousers, a hand extending toward her. "Let me help you," the voice said gently. Without thinking, driven by desperation and the need to escape, Emily took his hand. His grip was warm and steady, pulling her to her feet with surprising gentleness. He guided her toward the car, shielding her from the rain with his umbrella. "Where do you need to go?" he asked as he opened the passenger door. Emily looked back up the street toward the chapel. She could hear voices in the distance, people searching for her. "Anywhere," she whispered, climbing into the car. "Anywhere but here." The man got back into the driver's seat, and Emily finally saw his face clearly. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair slightly damp from the rain, strong features, and eyes that were a striking shade of grey-blue. He looked at her with an expression that was equal parts concern and curiosity, taking in her soaked wedding dress and tear-stained face. "I'm James," he said simply. "Emily," she managed, her voice breaking on her own name. James studied her for a long moment, then put the car in gear. "Hold on, Emily. Let's get you somewhere safe." Ordeal. As the Mercedes pulled away from the curb, Emily watched the village of Saint-Étienne disappear behind them. She had no money, no plan, no idea what would happen next. She had just climbed into a stranger's car in her wedding dress, fleeing from a life she could no longer bear. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her entire life. The car was warm and dry, the leather seats soft beneath her soaked dress. Classical music played softly from the speakers, a Mozart concerto that seemed absurdly peaceful given the chaos of the last hour. Emily tried to control her breathing, but panic kept rising in her chest like a tide. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. You must think I'm insane." James kept his eyes on the road, navigating the winding country roads with practiced ease. "I think you're someone who just made a very difficult choice," he said quietly. "Whatever happened back there, you clearly had your reasons." Emily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I ran away from my own wedding. I left my fiancé at the altar. My parents—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The reality of what she had done was beginning to sink in, and it was overwhelming. "Do you regret it?" James asked, his tone neutral, non-judgmental. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the tears continue to fall. She thought about Richard's cold eyes, about the life of quiet desperation that awaited her, about the slow death of every dream she had ever harbored. "No," she whispered, "I don't regret it. I'm terrified, but I don't regret it." James nodded, as if he understood something profound in that answer. "Then you made the right choice." They drove in silence for a while, the rain gradually lessening to a drizzle. Emily watched the landscape change from the familiar streets of Saint-Étienne to roads she didn't recognize, heading deeper into the Provençal countryside. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally. "There's a small inn about 20 kilometers from here," James said. "It's quiet, discreet. You can rest there, figure out your next steps, unless there's somewhere else you'd prefer to go." Emily shook her head. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment was in her parents' name. Her friends were all connected to her family. She had no independence, no resources of her own. The reality of her situation was beginning to dawn on her with crushing weight. "I don't have any money," she admitted, shame burning her cheeks. "I don't have anything, just this dress." "Don't worry about that now," James said, his voice firm but kind. "One thing at a time." Emily looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was something about him that seemed familiar, though she was certain they had never met. He carried himself with quiet confidence. His clothes were clearly expensive, and the car they were driving was worth more than her parents' annual income. Yet there was also a sadness in his eyes, a weight he carried that she recognized because she carried her own. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be dangerous." James's lips curved into a slight smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're sitting in a soaked wedding dress, crying in the rain. I think I'll take my chances." He paused, then added more seriously, "Everyone deserves a chance to start over, Emily, even when they don't know how yet." Something in his words suggested he spoke from experience, but Emily was too exhausted to probe further. She leaned her head against the window, watching the French countryside roll past in shades of green and grey. As they drove away from everything she had ever known, Emily Carter realized she had just stepped off the edge of a cliff. She was falling, uncertain where she would land, unsure if she would survive the impact. But for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own direction, even if that direction was straight down into the unknown. And somehow, in the presence of this stranger named James, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she would find solid ground again. The inn appeared through the mist, like something from a storybook. A stone building covered in climbing wisteria, with wooden shutters painted the color of aged lavender. A hand-painted sign reading "Auberge de la Colline" swung gently in the breeze. James parked the Mercedes in the small gravel lot, and Emily noticed there were only 2 other cars present. "Wait here a moment," James said, getting out of the car before she could respond. Emily watched through the rain-speckled window as he entered the inn. She was alone with her thoughts for the first time since her escape, and they were not kind companions. What had she done? Her parents had already called her phone 17 times. She had finally turned it off after the first dozen, unable to bear hearing her mother's increasingly frantic messages. James emerged from the inn within minutes, holding what looked like a key. He returned to the car and opened her door, offering his hand once again. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you inside and dry." Emily allowed him to help her out of the car, though her legs felt weak and unsteady. Her wedding dress, once pristine and elegant, was now a sodden mess of silk and lace, torn in several places and stained with mud and grass. She must have looked absolutely ridiculous. James noticed her distress and removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something expensive and masculine. "The owner is a friend," he explained as they walked toward the entrance. "She's very discreet and won't ask questions." Inside, the inn was cozy and welcoming, with exposed wooden beams, a fireplace crackling with fresh logs, and the scent of baking bread filling the air. An elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair pinned in a neat bun stood behind a wooden desk, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Emily's wedding dress but saying nothing. "Madame Laurent, this is Emily," James said in French. "She needs somewhere to rest for a while." Madame Laurent's expression softened with understanding. "Of course, Monsieur Thompson. Room 7, the one with the garden view. I've prepared fresh towels and there's a robe in the wardrobe. Would Mademoiselle like some hot tea?" "Yes, please," Emily managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." James guided Emily up a narrow staircase to the second floor, down a hallway with cream-colored walls decorated with watercolor paintings of the Provençal countryside. He unlocked a door at the end of the hall and stepped aside to let her enter first. The room was small but beautiful, with a brass bed covered in white linens, a window overlooking a garden filled with roses and lavender, and a private bathroom with an old-fashioned clawfoot tub. It was simple, peaceful, and exactly what Emily needed. "The bathroom is through there," James said, gesturing. "Take your time. I'll have Madame Laurent bring up some clothes as well. She keeps a few things for emergencies." Emily turned to face him, clutching his jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, more insistently this time. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." James was silent for a long moment, his grey-blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Let's just say I know what it's like to feel trapped by other people's expectations," he finally said, "and I know what it takes to break free." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest, Emily. We can talk more when you're ready." After he left, Emily stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the strangeness of her situation. Just hours ago, she had been standing in a chapel, preparing to marry a man she didn't love. Now she was in a country inn, soaked to the bone, having been rescued by a complete stranger whose kindness seemed almost too good to be true. She moved to the bathroom and began the difficult process of removing her wedding dress. The buttons were tiny and numerous, the fabric clinging to her skin. After several minutes of struggling, she managed to step out of the ruined gown, leaving it in a heap on the tile floor like a discarded chrysalis. The hot water of the bath was heaven. Emily sank into it, letting the heat seep into her bones, washing away the physical remnants of her aborted wedding. But it couldn't wash away the guilt, the fear, or the uncertainty of what came next. Her thoughts turned to her parents. By now, they would know she wasn't coming back. The humiliation, the business deal with Richard falling through, the gossip that would spread through their social circles like wildfire. She had destroyed everything they had worked for, everything they had planned. And yet, beneath the guilt, that small spark of freedom still glowed. There was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Emily, it's Madame Laurent. I have some clothes for you." Emily quickly wrapped herself in the thick white robe hanging in the bathroom and opened the door. Madame Laurent entered with an armful of clothing and set them on the bed with a warm smile. "These should fit you, dear," she said kindly. "Take your time and come downstairs when you're ready. There's a fire in the sitting room, and I've made a pot of chamomile tea." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Madame Laurent reached out and gently squeezed Emily's hand. "We all have moments when we must choose between what others want for us and what our hearts demand. You are braver than you know." With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Emily examined the clothes, a pair of soft jeans, a cream-colored sweater, undergarments still in their packaging, and a pair of simple canvas shoes. Everything was in her size, as if it had been chosen specifically for her. She dressed slowly, her body aching from the run and the emotional exhaustion. When she finally made her way downstairs, she found James sitting in the sitting room near the fireplace, a laptop open on his knees. Though he closed it immediately when he saw her, he had changed as well, now wearing a simple black sweater and jeans that made him look younger, more approachable. "Feel better?" he asked. "A little," Emily admitted, taking a seat in the armchair across from him. Madame Laurent appeared with a tray bearing a teapot, 2 cups, and a plate of butter cookies. Emily accepted a cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound. Finally, Emily spoke. "I need to tell you why I ran," she said. "You deserve to know what kind of mess you've gotten yourself into by helping me." James shook his head. "You don't owe me explanations." "I want to," Emily insisted, and she did. For some reason, this stranger felt safe, like someone who would listen without judgment. So she told him everything, about her parents' failing business, about Richard Pemberton and his cold proposal that was really a business transaction, about the months of pressure and manipulation that had led to this day, about how she had tried to convince herself she could go through with it. That duty and family obligation were more important than her own happiness. About the moment she had looked in the mirror and realized she couldn't sacrifice her entire life for someone else's comfort. James listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your parents," he finally said. "They love you, I'm sure. But love that demands the sacrifice of your entire self isn't love, Emily. It's control dressed up in familial obligation." The words hit Emily like a physical blow because they were so precisely true. "They'll never forgive me," she whispered. "Perhaps not immediately," James acknowledged, "but you'll forgive yourself eventually, and that matters more." Emily looked at him with new curiosity. "You speak like someone who's been through something similar." A shadow crossed James's face. "My father built an empire in England and expected me to take over without question. He had my entire life planned, the schools I would attend, the degree I would earn, the company I would run, even the woman I would marry." He paused, staring into the fire. "I spent 10 years doing exactly what he wanted, becoming exactly who he demanded I be. I was miserable every single day." "What happened?" Emily asked softly. "He died 3 years ago," James said, his voice flat. "Heart attack in his office. And I inherited everything he'd built, everything he'd tried to force me to become. The irony is brutal, isn't it? I finally had the freedom to walk away, but I was already so deep in the role I'd been playing that I didn't know who I really was anymore." Emily felt a surge of understanding. "Is that why you're here in France? Trying to figure it out?" James nodded slowly. "I've been traveling for the past year, trying to, I don't know, find something real. Something that isn't about duty or obligation or living up to someone else's legacy." He looked at her directly. "When I saw you sitting in the rain in that wedding dress, I saw myself 3 years ago, trapped, desperate, not knowing how to escape." "But you did escape," Emily said. "Eventually." "Not soon enough," James replied quietly. "I wasted years of my life being someone I wasn't. Don't waste yours, Emily." They sat together as evening fell outside, talking about dreams they had abandoned and futures they couldn't quite envision. Emily learned that James Thompson was indeed wealthy, having inherited Thompson Industries, a manufacturing empire in England. He had stepped back from active management, leaving it to a trusted board while he tried to figure out what he actually wanted from life. "Do you ever feel guilty," Emily asked, "for having the option to walk away?" "Every day," James admitted. "But guilt is just another form of control, isn't it? Feeling guilty doesn't help anyone. Making choices that honor who you really are, that's what matters." As night deepened, Madame Laurent brought them a simple dinner of roasted chicken, vegetables, and crusty bread. They ate by the fireplace, and Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a deep sense of rightness, as if for the first time in her adult life she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "What will you do tomorrow?" James asked as they finished their meal. Emily had been avoiding thinking about tomorrow. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back home. I have no money, no job, nowhere to go." The panic began to rise again in her chest. "Then stay here for a while," James said simply. "Madame Laurent always needs help during the summer season. She mentioned her assistant left recently. You could work here, earn some money, have time to think and plan." "I couldn't impose like that," Emily protested. "You're not imposing," James said firmly. "You're accepting help when you need it. There's a difference." He paused, then added, "I'm staying in the area for a few more weeks myself. I've rented a house in the hills. If you need anything, someone to talk to, I'm here." Emily looked at this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. Part of her wondered if this was all too convenient, too perfect. But another part of her, the part that had finally found the courage to run, knew that sometimes the universe provided exactly what you needed when you were brave enough to reach for it. "Thank you, James," she said, meaning it with her whole heart. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay kindness, Emily," he said with a gentle smile. "You just need to pass it forward someday." That night, Emily lay in the brass bed watching moonlight filter through the lace curtains. Her phone remained off, The reality of her family's reaction, something she wasn't quite ready to face. But for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe fully, like there was space for her to exist as herself, rather than as someone else's expectation. She had run away from her wedding. She had climbed into a stranger's car. She had left behind everything familiar and safe, and somehow, impossibly, she had found sanctuary. 3 weeks passed like a dream that Emily was afraid to wake from. She settled into a routine at the Auberge de la Colline that felt more like healing than work. Each morning, she rose with the sun, helping Madame Laurent prepare breakfast for the handful of guests who stayed at the inn. She learned to make perfect croissants, to brew coffee the French way, to arrange flowers from the garden in small vases for each table. The work was simple, physical, and deeply satisfying in a way her administrative job had never been. Her hands, which had spent years typing spreadsheets and filing papers, now kneaded bread dough and pruned roses. She felt herself becoming real again, solid, present in her own body. James visited the inn nearly every day, always with some excuse. He needed Madame Laurent's recommendation for a wine. He wanted to try the new dessert. He was passing by and thought he'd stop for coffee. Emily saw through these pretenses, but said nothing, secretly grateful for his presence. They fell into an easy friendship. James would arrive in the late afternoon, and they would sit in the garden or by the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his travels through Italy and Spain, about the art he'd discovered and the people he'd met. She shared her love of literature, reciting passages from her favorite books from memory, explaining why certain novels had shaped her understanding of the world. "You should be teaching," James said one evening as they walked through the lavender fields behind the inn. The purple flowers stretched toward the horizon, their scent heavy in the warm air. Emily smiled sadly. "That was always my dream, but I let it go when my father needed help with the business, and then it just seemed too late to start over." "It's never too late," James said firmly. "You're 26, Emily. Your whole life is ahead of you." "Says the millionaire who can do whatever he wants," Emily replied, but there was no bitterness in her tone, only gentle teasing. James stopped walking and turned to face her. "Money doesn't make starting over easier, Emily. It just provides different obstacles. I have resources, yes, but I also have a company with thousands of employees depending on me, a board of directors questioning every decision I make, and a family who thinks I've lost my mind for stepping away." He paused, his expression serious. "You have something I'm still searching for, the courage to choose yourself over everything else. Don't underestimate how powerful that is." Emily felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze. There was something in the way James looked at her that made her feel truly seen, not as someone's daughter or someone's intended bride, but as Emily, simply herself. But their peaceful existence was shattered on a Thursday afternoon when a familiar Mercedes pulled into the inn's parking lot. Emily was in the garden, cutting roses for the evening's arrangements, when she heard her mother's voice calling her name. Margaret Carter emerged from the car like a force of nature, perfectly dressed despite the long drive, her expression a mixture of fury and relief. Behind her, Emily's father exited more slowly, his face haggard and years older than she remembered. Emily felt her entire body go rigid. She had known this confrontation was inevitable, but she hadn't expected it here, in the place that had become her sanctuary. "Emily Louise Carter," her mother said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. 3 weeks, 3 weeks without a word, letting us think you might be dead in a ditch somewhere. "I sent a text message," Emily said quietly, "telling you I was safe. One message, one text saying you were safe and needed time. Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" Margaret's voice rose with each word. "The humiliation, the gossip, the business deal that fell through because you decided to throw a tantrum on your wedding day." Emily felt her old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the instinct to apologize, to soothe, to make everything all right for everyone else. But then she remembered James's words. "Love that demands the sacrifice of your entire self isn't love, it's control." "It wasn't a tantrum, Mother," Emily said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It was the first honest choice I've made in years." Her father finally spoke, his voice weary. "Emily, please, come home. We can fix this. Richard is willing to forgive this incident. He understands you were overwhelmed." Emily stared at her father in disbelief. "Forgive me, father. I don't want his forgiveness. I don't want to marry him. I never wanted to marry him." "What you want isn't the point," her mother snapped. "This isn't about romance or fairy tales. This is about responsibility, about family, about using me to solve your problems," Emily interrupted, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "That's what this has always been about. Not my happiness, not my future, just your business deal." The words hung in the air like accusations, and Emily saw her mother flinch as if she'd been slapped. Her father's face crumpled, showing his age and exhaustion. "We only wanted what was best for you," he said weakly. "No," Emily said more gently now. "You wanted what was easiest for you, and I let you for years. I let you shape my life because I was too afraid to disappoint you. But I can't do that anymore, Father. I can't sacrifice my entire existence for your comfort." "So you'll just throw away everything?" Margaret demanded. "Your family, your home, your responsibilities? To do what exactly? Work in some backwater inn for pennies? If that's what it takes to find out who I actually am, then yes," Emily said. "I'd rather be poor and honest than wealthy and living a lie." "You're being incredibly selfish," her mother said coldly. "Maybe I am," Emily agreed. "Maybe that's exactly what I need to be right now." Behind her, Emily heard footsteps on the gravel path. She turned to see James approaching, concern evident in his expression. He must have heard the raised voices from inside the inn. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she took in James's expensive clothes and confident bearing. "And who is this? The reason you abandoned your wedding?" "Mother, don't," Emily warned, but Margaret was beyond reasoning. "Did you seduce my daughter? Convince her to throw away her future for some sordid affair?" James's expression remained calm, though Emily saw a muscle tick in his jaw. "I'm the person who found Emily sitting in the rain, crying, and offered her a safe place to go," he said evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." "How convenient," Margaret said with withering sarcasm. "A knight in shining armor just happens to be driving by at the exact moment my daughter decides to have her breakdown." "Margaret, please," Emily's father said, looking embarrassed. "Let's not make this worse." But the confrontation had already spiraled beyond repair. Emily felt years of suppressed anger and resentment bubbling up, all the time she had swallowed her own needs, ignored her own voice, made herself small to fit into the box her parents had built for her. "You want to know why I ran?" Emily asked, her voice rising despite her attempts to stay calm. "Because I looked at myself in that mirror, in that wedding dress, and I couldn't recognize my own reflection. Because I realized that if I walked down that aisle, I would be killing every part of myself that actually matters. Because I deserve more than a loveless marriage to a man who sees me as a business acquisition." "Love?" her mother scoffed. "You want to talk about love? Love is sacrifice, Emily. Love is putting your family first, even when it's hard." "No," Emily said firmly. "That's not love. That's martyrdom, and I'm done being a sacrifice on the altar of your expectations." Margaret's face went white with rage. "If you don't come home with us right now, if you don't fix this disaster you've created, then you are no daughter of mine." The threat hung in the air, final and devastating. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, but she held her ground. She thought about the past 3 weeks, about the person she had started to become, about the dreams she was finally allowing herself to remember. "Then, I guess I'm not your daughter anymore," Emily whispered. Her mother's face crumpled for just a moment, before hardening into a mask of cold fury. She turned on her heel and marched back to the car. Emily's father lingered, looking at his daughter with something like grief in his eyes. "Emily," he said softly. "Please." Emily felt her resolve waver. This was her father, the man who had taught her to read, who had called her his little princess, who had once promised she could be anything she wanted to be. But that had been before business failures, before desperation, before he had forgotten that she was a person and not a commodity. "I love you, Father," Emily said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I can't save you by destroying myself. You taught me to be strong. Now let me use that strength to choose my own life." Her father's shoulders sagged. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into her hands. "Your grandmother left you money when she died. We were holding it in trust until you married, but it's yours. Take it." He glanced back at the car where Margaret sat rigid with fury. "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm sorry we failed you." Then he was gone, walking back to the car with the gait of a defeated man. Emily watched them drive away, the envelope clutched in her trembling hands, feeling like she had just cut herself loose from an anchor that had been drowning her. James's hand settled gently on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" Emily let out a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. "I just disowned myself from my family. I'm homeless, essentially unemployed, and I've probably ruined my parents' business. I should not be all right." "But are you?" James asked softly. Emily turned to face him, seeing genuine concern in his grey-blue eyes. She took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over her, and beneath the grief and the fear, she felt something else. Relief. "I think I am," she said, surprised by the truth of it. "It hurts terribly, but I feel lighter somehow, like I can finally breathe all the way down." James pulled her into an embrace, and Emily let herself lean into his strength, crying against his shoulder. He held her without speaking, without trying to fix anything, just providing steady presence while she processed the magnitude of what she had just done. When her tears finally subsided, they walked back to the inn together. Madame Laurent was waiting with tea and understanding, having witnessed the entire confrontation from the window. She didn't ask questions, simply seated Emily by the fire and disappeared to give her space. Emily opened the envelope her father had given her. Inside was a bank statement showing an account in her name with nearly 50,000 euros. Her grandmother's inheritance that she hadn't even known existed. There was also a handwritten note in her father's script. "Your grandmother always said you had a fire in you that shouldn't be extinguished. She was right. Use this to build the life you deserve. I'm sorry I forgot that you were always meant to fly. Father." Emily pressed the note to her chest, crying fresh tears. This time, though, they weren't tears of pain, but of bittersweet recognition. Her father did love her in his way. He had just lost sight of what that meant in the face of his own failures and fears. "This changes everything," she said, showing James the bank statement. He studied it carefully, then smiled. "It gives you options. What do you want to do with them?" Emily thought about the question. For the first time in her life, she had the freedom and the resources to choose her own path. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I want to teach," she said slowly, the words feeling like truth as she spoke them. "I want to finish my teaching certification, maybe work with children who love literature the way I do. I want to write, even if it's just for myself. I want to travel, see things beyond Provence. I want to become someone I'm proud to be." James's smile widened. "Then that's what you'll do." Over the following days, Emily began to build a plan. She would stay at the inn through the summer season, working and saving money while she applied to teaching programs. She spent her evenings researching schools, writing essays, imagining futures that had once seemed impossible. And through it all, James was there. He helped her fill out applications, offered to write letters of recommendation through his connections, listened to her doubts and fears without judgment. Their friendship deepened into something Emily couldn't quite name, but felt in every fiber of her being. One evening, as they sat in the lavender fields watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, James turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "What is it?" "I'm going back to England next week," he said. "The board has been asking me to return, to take a more active role in the company again, and I think I'm ready. These past few weeks, watching you find your courage, it's helped me find mine too." Emily felt her heart sink. even as she forced a smile. "That's wonderful, James. You should go. You've been running from that life long enough. Come with me," he said suddenly, turning to face her fully. Emily blinked in surprise. "What?" "Come to England with me," James repeated. "You could do your teaching certification there. There are excellent programs in London. You could stay at my estate while you study, have time to write, to figure out what you want." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want to leave you behind, Emily. You've become too important to me." Emily's heart was racing. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to follow this man who had saved her, who understood her, who looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. But another part of her, the part that was finally learning to be honest, held back. "James," she said gently, "you saved my life. I will always be grateful for that. But I can't trade one rescue for another. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own, make my own way, without depending on someone else's support." James's face fell, but he nodded slowly. "You're right. Of course you're right. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." "Don't apologize," Emily said, reaching for his hand. "You've given me more than you know, but I need to do this next part alone. I need to know that I can." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands, both knowing that something between them was ending before it had truly begun. But there was no bitterness in it, only the sweet sadness of paths diverging. "Will I see you again?" James asked quietly. Emily squeezed his hand. "I hope so, when I'm ready, when I've become the person I'm meant to be." James brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "However long it takes." The week passed too quickly. Emily threw herself into work and planning, trying not to think about James's impending departure. But on his last evening, she couldn't avoid saying goodbye. They met in the garden one final time, surrounded by the roses Emily had learned to care for, under a sky full of stars. James looked at her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding me what courage looks like, for showing me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves, even when it costs us everything." "Thank you for stopping your car in the rain," Emily replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. "For seeing someone worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." James cupped her face in his hands, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "You were always worth saving, Emily Carter. I just helped you remember that you could save yourself." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a kiss that tasted of goodbye and possibility and promises that weren't quite made. Emily kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and affection and longing she couldn't put into words. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Go become extraordinary," James whispered. "Go become yourself," Emily whispered back. The next morning, Emily watched from her window as James's black Mercedes pulled out of the inn's parking lot for the last time. She pressed her hand to the glass, watching until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she turned back to her room, to the applications spread across her bed, to the life she was building, one brave choice at a time. It hurt to watch him go, but it felt right too. She was learning that sometimes love meant letting go, that growth required space, that becoming whole meant standing alone first. Emily Carter had run away from a wedding in the rain. She had climbed into a stranger's car and found unexpected sanctuary. She had faced her parents and chosen herself over their expectations. She had said goodbye to a man who had shown her what true kindness looked like. And now, for the first time in her life, she was ready to discover who she could become when no one else was writing her story. 8 months had passed since Emily watched James drive away from the Auberge de la Colline. 8 months of transformation that felt like a lifetime, compressed into seasons. She had left the inn at summer's end, taking with her Madame Laurent's blessing and a heart full of gratitude. She moved to Lyon, enrolling in an intensive teaching certification program at the Université Lumière. She found a tiny apartment in the Croix-Rousse district, up 6 flights of stairs, with a window that overlooked red-tiled roofs and the distant Alps. The apartment was barely larger than her room at the inn had been, but it was hers. She furnished it with second-hand finds from flea markets. A worn velvet armchair the color of burgundy wine, a wooden desk scarred with decades of use, bookshelves she painted white and filled with novels in French and English. She hung curtains she sewed herself and planted herbs in terracotta pots on her narrow balcony. It was far from luxurious, but Emily loved every inch of it because she had chosen it, earned it, made it her own. The teaching program challenged her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She student-taught at a school in one of Lyon's working-class neighborhoods, working with children who came from difficult circumstances, who saw education as either salvation or prison, depending on the day. She learned that teaching wasn't about reciting information, but about kindling curiosity, about showing young people that words could be bridges to understanding themselves and the world. There was a girl in her class named Amélie, 12 years old, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge of hardship. Amélie never participated, never raised her hand, sat in the back of the classroom with her arms crossed and her walls up. But Emily noticed that Amélie's eyes followed the words when they read aloud, that she listened even when she pretended not to care. One day, Emily assigned the class to write about a moment when they felt truly free. Most students wrote about vacations or summer holidays, but Amélie turned in a piece about standing on a bridge over the Saône, watching the water flow, imagining all the places it went that she had never seen. The writing was raw and beautiful and broke Emily's heart. After class, Emily asked Amélie to stay behind. The girl's defenses immediately went up, her expression shuddering. "Am I in trouble?" Amélie asked warily. "No," Emily said gently. "I wanted to tell you that your writing was extraordinary. You have a real gift, Amélie." The girl's tough facade cracked just slightly. "It's just words." "Words are never just words," Emily said. "They're how we make sense of what we feel, how we connect with others, how we change the world. Your words matter." Amélie's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "My foster parents say I should focus on practical things, not dreaming." Emily's heart clenched with recognition. How many times had she been told the same thing? How many years had she spent believing that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford? "Amélie, look at me," Emily said, waiting until the girl met her eyes. "I was engaged to be married to a man I didn't love because I thought being practical was more important than being true to myself. I ran away from my own wedding because I finally realized that denying who you are isn't practical. It's just slow death. Your dreams aren't frivolous. They're what make you you." Something shifted in Amélie's expression. "Did you really run away from your wedding?" Emily smiled. "I really did. Climbed right out of my wedding dress and ran through the streets in the rain. It was the scariest and best thing I've ever done." "What happened after?" Amélie asked, genuinely curious now. "I had to figure out who I actually was when no one else was telling me who to be," Emily said. "It was hard. I made mistakes. I cried a lot. But I also found myself, and that was worth everything I lost." Amélie was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "I want to be a writer. Not just for school, but for real. Is that stupid?" "It's the opposite of stupid," Emily assured her. "It's brave." From that day forward, Amélie began to transform. She participated in class, wrote with increasing confidence, shared her work with her peers. Emily watched her blossom and felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why she had become a teacher, not to transfer information, but to help young people find their own voices. But Emily's journey wasn't without its struggles. There were nights when loneliness felt like a physical weight, when her tiny apartment felt too small and too empty. There were moments when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, if she should have stayed with her family, married Richard, chosen security over uncertainty. And there were times when she thought about James. She hadn't contacted him since he left, wanting to honor her promise to herself that she would stand alone first. But she often wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he ever thought about that summer in Provence. She had kept the jacket he had given her that first rainy day, and sometimes she would pull it from her closet and breathe in the fading scent of cedar, remembering the kindness of a stranger who had become so much more. In the spring, Emily completed her certification and was offered a permanent teaching position at the school where she had been student teaching. The salary was modest, but it was enough. She accepted immediately, feeling a surge of pride that had nothing to do with anyone's approval but her own. To celebrate, she did something she had been putting off for months. She called her father. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, his voice cautious. "Emily?" "Hi, Father," she said, her heart pounding. "I wanted you to know that I finished my teaching certification. I have a job now at a school in Lyon. I'm doing well." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, her father said, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart, so very proud." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "How are you and Mother?" "Managing," he said carefully. "The business is stabilizing. We had to make some difficult changes, but we're surviving. Your mother," he paused. "She's not ready to talk yet, Emily, but she will be, eventually. She loves you, even if she doesn't know how to show it right now." "I know," Emily said softly. "Tell her I love her too, and that I'm sorry for the pain I caused, even though I'm not sorry for the choice I made." "That's all we can ever do," her father said. "Make the choices we can live with and love the people we hurt as best we can." They talked for another hour, carefully navigating around topics that were still too raw, but building a tentative bridge back toward each other. When Emily finally hung up, she felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. That evening, she sat at her desk and did something she had been wanting to do for months. She began to write, not for an assignment or a class, but for herself. She wrote about a girl who ran away from her wedding, about the kindness of strangers, about learning to choose yourself even when it costs you everything. The words poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, and she wrote late into the night, her fingers flying across the keyboard. When she finally stopped, dawn was breaking over Lyon's rooftops, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Emily saved her document, a smile playing at her lips. She had written 20,000 words in a single night, the beginning of something that might become a novel or might remain just for her. Either way, it felt like magic. The school year ended with a small celebration. Amélie gave Emily a handmade card with a poem inside. "You taught me that running away can sometimes mean running toward yourself. Thank you for showing me it's okay to be brave." Emily hugged the girl tightly, knowing that teaching Amélie had taught her just as much. They had both been learning to be brave together. As summer approached again, Emily found herself thinking more frequently about James. It had been almost a year since they said goodbye. She had done what she needed to do. She had stood alone, built a life, discovered who she was without anyone else defining her. She was no longer the frightened girl in the rain, running from a wedding. She was Emily Carter, teacher, writer, woman who had chosen herself and survived. And she missed him. Late one evening, sitting on her balcony with a glass of wine, watching the stars appear over Lyon, Emily made a decision. She pulled out her phone and composed a message. "Dear James, it's been a year. I've become someone I'm proud to be. I think I'm ready now. If you're still waiting, I'd like to see you again. Emily." She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the send button. Then, taking a deep breath, she pressed it. The response came 3 minutes later. "I never stopped waiting." "When can I see you?" Emily's heart soared. She typed quickly, "Next weekend. I have a break from school. I could come to England if that works for you. I'll send you flight details. Emily, I can't wait to see who you've become." Emily smiled into the night, feeling excitement and nervousness and joy all tangled together. She had spent a year becoming herself, learning to stand alone, building a life that was entirely her own. She had proven to herself that she didn't need rescuing, that she was complete without someone else to make her whole. But maybe, just maybe, being complete on her own meant she was finally ready to share her life with someone else. Not because she needed them to survive, but because she wanted them to be part of her journey. As she went back inside her tiny apartment, Emily caught sight of her reflection in the window. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her, confident, radiant, free. She had run away from a wedding in the rain a year ago, leaving behind a life that would have slowly killed her spirit. Now she was running towards something new, not in desperation, but in hope. Not because she needed to escape, but because she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The girl who had fled her wedding had transformed into a woman who knew her own worth. And that woman was ready to discover what love looked like when two whole people chose each other freely, without need or desperation, but from strength and genuine connection. Emily Carter was finally ready for her real love story to begin. The flight to London felt both endless and too short. Emily pressed her forehead against the airplane window, watching France disappear beneath clouds, her stomach a tangle of anticipation and nerves. She had spent the past week overthinking everything: what she would wear, what she would say, whether James would be disappointed by the reality of her after a year of separation. But beneath the anxiety was a steady current of certainty. She had changed, yes, but so had the nature of what she wanted from James. She wasn't the desperate girl who had climbed into his car seeking rescue. She was a woman who had built her own life and now wanted to see if that life might have room for someone else in it. James had sent a car to meet her at Heathrow, a sleek black vehicle driven by a kind older man named Thomas, who told her Mr. Thompson was eagerly awaiting her arrival. They drove through London's bustling streets, then out into the countryside, where manicured hedgerows gave way to rolling green hills. The Thompson estate appeared through a break in the trees, like something from a period drama, a sprawling Georgian manor house in honey-coloured stone, surrounded by gardens that stretched toward distant woodlands. Emily's breath caught. This was James's world, the one he had been born into, the one he had tried to escape. The contrast to her sixth-floor walk-up in Lyon was almost comical. But as the car pulled up to the front entrance, she saw James emerge from the house, and everything else faded away. He wore simple jeans and a dark blue sweater, his hair slightly longer than she remembered, and the smile that lit his face when he saw her was pure and genuine and made her heart skip. Emily barely waited for the car to stop before she was out the door, walking toward him, then running. James met her halfway, catching her in his arms and lifting her off the ground, spinning her once before setting her down gently. They stood there, holding each other, and Emily felt like she had finally come home to a place she hadn't known she was seeking. "Let me look at you," James said, pulling back just enough to study her face. "Emily, you're radiant. You look so happy," Emily supplied with a smile. "Exactly that," James said, his eyes shining. "Happy, complete. Like you found whatever you were searching for." "I found myself," Emily said simply, "and it turns out I kind of like who I am." James laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her forehead. "I knew you would. Come inside. I want to hear everything." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior: high ceilings, antique furniture, artwork that probably belonged in museums. But James led her past all of it to a cozy study lined with bookshelves, where a fire crackled in the hearth and two comfortable chairs sat by the window overlooking the gardens. "This is my favorite room," James explained, pouring them both tea from a service that had been waiting. "When the house feels too much like a museum, I come here." They settled into the chairs, and Emily told him everything. About her teaching program, about Amélie and the other students, about her tiny apartment and the novel she had started writing. James listened with complete attention, asking questions, celebrating her victories, understanding her struggles. "You did it," he said when she finished, his voice filled with admiration. "You built exactly the life you wanted." "I did," Emily agreed, "and now I'm ready for the next chapter." She looked at him directly. "Tell me about your year, James. What brought you back here? What have you been doing?" James's expression grew more serious. "I came back to face what I'd been running from. The company, the legacy, all of it. I realized that you were right. I couldn't find myself by just wandering and avoiding. I had to actually engage with my life, make intentional choices about what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to change." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the grounds. "I've restructured the company, brought in new leadership, shifted our focus to more sustainable practices. I'm still chairman of the board, but I'm not trying to be my father anymore. I'm doing it my own way, using the resources I have to create something I believe in. I'm proud of you, Emily said softly. James turned back to her with a vulnerable smile. I've also been preparing for something else, something I've been thinking about for a year. Emily's heart began to race. What's that? Instead of answering, James held out his hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her through the house and out into the gardens, following a winding path through beds of roses and lavender that reminded Emily powerfully of the inn in Provence. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a smaller building set apart from the main house, a charming stone cottage covered in climbing wisteria. This was the original manor house, before my great-grandfather built the main residence, James explained, unlocking the door. It's been used for storage for decades, but I've been renovating it. I finished it last month. He opened the door, and Emily stepped inside to catch her breath. The interior had been transformed into an open, light-filled space. There was a living area with comfortable furniture arranged around a fireplace, a small but modern kitchen, and at the far end, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. But what made Emily's eyes fill with tears was what filled that sun-drenched room. Bookshelves lined the walls, a beautiful antique desk sat before the windows, and a comfortable reading chair was positioned in the corner. It was a writer's dream, a teacher's sanctuary, a space designed for someone who loved words and stories, and the quiet work of creation. James, Emily whispered, what is this? James came to stand beside her, his expression both nervous and hopeful. It's for you, if you want it. I know you have your life in Lyon, your job, your apartment. I'm not asking you to give any of that up, but I thought, he paused, gathering his words carefully, I thought maybe you could have both. Teach during the school year in Lyon, come here during summers and holidays to write. The cottage would be yours, Emily. Not mine, not ours, yours. A space that belongs only to you, where you can create and dream and be exactly who you are. Emily turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Why would you do this? Because I love you, James said simply. I've loved you since I found you in the rain, and that love has only grown deeper, watching you become who you're meant to be. But I don't want to rescue you or save you or be the solution to your problems. I want to be your partner, someone who celebrates your independence and supports your dreams without trying to control them. Emily's heart was so full she could barely speak. James, I love you too. I have for so long, but I needed to know I could stand alone first. I needed to prove to myself that I was choosing you from strength, not need. And now? James asked, his voice rough with emotion. Now I'm choosing you, Emily said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. Not because I need you to save me, but because you make my life richer, because you see who I really am and celebrate it, because loving you doesn't make me smaller. It makes me more myself. James pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a year's worth of longing and love and promises. Emily kissed him back, feeling the rightness of it in every cell of her body. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not desperate or suffocating, but expansive and freeing. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. I have something else to show you, James said, wiping tears from his eyes. He led her to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder. Inside were brochures and information packets for education programs, literacy charities, and children's writing workshops. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, he explained, using some of the company's resources to support literacy education, especially for underprivileged children. I was hoping you might want to help me design the programs, maybe even run some of them. Emily stared at the materials, overwhelmed. You want to do this, really? I want to do something that matters, James said. Something that makes a difference. And after meeting you, after hearing about your work with students like Amélie, I realized that helping young people find their voices through education and literature, that's something that matters. I have the resources. You have the expertise and the passion. Together, we could actually change lives." Emily thought about Amélie, about all the children like her who just needed someone to believe in them, to show them that their dreams were valid and achievable. She thought about having the opportunity to reach more students, to create programs that could help hundreds, maybe thousands of young people discover their own potential. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I want to do this with you." Over the following days, Emily and James fell into a rhythm that felt like coming home. They spent mornings walking the estate grounds, talking about their foundation plans, dreaming big dreams together. Afternoons were spent in the cottage that James had prepared for her, Emily writing, while James worked on his laptop, both of them simply comfortable in each other's presence. Evenings were for cooking together in the cottage's small kitchen, laughing over failed recipes and successful experiments, talking about everything and nothing until late into the night. Emily returned to Lyon a week later, but with a plan now. She would finish the school year, then spend the summer at the cottage in England, writing and developing the foundation's first programs with James. They would see each other on weekends, video calling every evening, building their relationship with the same patience and intention they both brought to their individual growth. And the plan worked beautifully. Over the next year, their love deepened and matured. James came to Lyon regularly, attending Emily's school events, meeting her students, seeing her in her element. Emily spent holidays and long weekends at the cottage, writing the novel that was pouring out of her while James worked nearby. They travelled together, visited Madame Laurent at the inn in Provence, laughed and argued and learned each other's rhythms. They also launched the Thompson Carter Literary Foundation, starting with 5 after-school programs in disadvantaged areas throughout England and France. Emily designed the curriculum, trained the teachers, and visited each site regularly. Watching children light up as they discovered the power of words and stories, seeing them gain confidence and voice, was more fulfilling than she could have imagined. 18 months after Emily had first visited England, James asked her to marry him. But it wasn't a grand gesture or an elaborate proposal. It was a quiet evening in the cottage, both of them curled up by the fire, when James simply said, "Emily, I want to spend my life with you, not because I need you, but because I choose you every day. Will you marry me?" Emily said yes without hesitation. The wedding took place the following spring at the Auberge de la Colline in Provence, in the gardens where Emily had first begun to bloom. It was a small ceremony. Madame Laurent, Emily's father, her mother still wasn't ready but had sent a card that Emily treasured, a handful of close friends, and Amélie, who served as Emily's flower girl and cried through the entire ceremony. Emily wore a simple dress of ivory lace, and this time when she looked in the mirror before walking down the makeshift aisle, she recognized herself completely. She wasn't walking toward an obligation or away from herself. She was walking toward a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine love, and the freedom to be fully herself. When she reached James under the flower-covered arbor, he was crying unashamedly. "You're so beautiful," he whispered as she took her place beside him. "So are you," Emily whispered back, meaning it in every way that mattered. Their vows were simple and honest. James promised to celebrate her independence, to support her dreams, to love her not in spite of her strength, but because of it. Emily promised to share her life with him, to build something beautiful together, to choose him every day not from need, but from love. When they were pronounced husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by the people who had helped them become who they were meant to be. And when they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Emily caught sight of her reflection in the inn's window. She was radiant, she was whole, she was free, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Epilogue. 5 years later, Emily stood at the front of a packed auditorium in Lyon, holding her newly published novel in her hands. The Runaway Bride had taken her 4 years to write, working on it during summers at the cottage and quiet evenings after teaching. It told the story of a woman who ran from her wedding and found herself, and it had struck a chord with readers across Europe. In the front row sat James, beaming with pride, and beside him was their 3-year-old daughter Claire, who had inherited her mother's love of stories and her father's steadfast kindness. Emily's father sat on Claire's other side, doting grandfather that he had become. Even Emily's mother had come, though she sat stiffly, still not entirely comfortable with the choices Emily had made, but present nonetheless, trying. After the reading, Emily approached, now 18 and about to start university on a full scholarship from the Thompson Carter Foundation. She was studying literature, planning to become a teacher herself. "You changed my life," Emily said, hugging Emily tightly. "You taught me it was okay to want more, to be brave enough to reach for it." "You taught me the same thing," Emily replied honestly. "We saved each other." That night, back at the cottage with Claire asleep in her room and James beside her on the couch, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the girl who had sat crying in the rain, terrified and desperate, not knowing that running away from one life would lead her to the life she was always meant to live. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, pulling her closer. "About how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is save yourself," Emily said, "and how true love doesn't rescue you, it celebrates you." James kissed her temple. "I love you, Emily Carter Thompson." "I love you too," Emily replied. "Thank you for stopping your car that day." "Thank you for getting in," James said with a smile. Outside, rain began to fall gently on the gardens, the same spring rain that had fallen the day they met. But inside the cottage, all was warm and bright and full of the kind of love that only comes when two whole people choose each other freely. Emily had run away from her wedding once, fleeing a life that would have destroyed her. But in the end, she had run straight into the arms of the life she was always meant to live, the love she was always meant to find, and the person she was always meant to become. And that made every painful step of the journey worth it. The end